I want to give a special shout out to all my patrons first. Thank you so much to my Bibliospren, Bibliohowlers, and my Bibliomancers. It means a lot to me that you give me your extra support for my passion and hobby. Hi everyone, Petrik here. For today's video, this will be about my March wrap-up. So March is an incredibly productive reading month for me. It's so much more productive than I thought it would be. I managed to finish reading 6 novels, 2 novellas, and also almost 40 volumes of manga. So yeah, it is very impressive in my opinion. And also, not only that, it's not only about the quantity, the quality is almost a complete win. There is only one book that let's just say that I dislike, and I think some of you might know what it is already. But yeah, it is almost a complete win, both in terms of quantity and also quality. It's also really crazy that 3 months have passed in the year 2023. I think every time I create this kind of monthly wrap-up, I'm always shocked by how fast time flies. And with that in mind, I'm also wondering, do you want me to create, let's say, a top books of the year so far video 4 times in a year or 2 times a year? I'm thinking about doing it 4 times because I have received plenty of DMs and requests saying that they would love to see me doing a top 10 books of the year so far every 3 months instead of 6 months, because I usually do it only about twice a year. So let me know what you think about that. But now let's talk about all the books that I finished last month. And the first one that I finished, this is Mother of Learning Arc 1. I have done a full spoiler-free review for this one, and this is Mother of Learning by Domagoj Kurmaj. I think that's the correct pronunciation. Thank you to readers from Croatia who have corrected me on how to pronounce the name. I truly appreciate that. So Mother of Learning is a web series that is now published into 4 volumes. It is a 3 story arcs divided into 4 volumes published by Raidmark. And yeah, this is the first volume. I have done a full spoiler-free review for this one on my channel. Originally, I thought that because this was originally a web novel, I really thought that the quality of the writing or the storytelling would be lacking. Apparently, it's really not the case. I really had a great time reading Mother of Learning Arc 1. I expected this would be a fun time loop fantasy story, and I got what I want. Even though the concept itself feels like the story would be repetitive, but it did not feel that way to me. Every cycle, every loop always brought new revelations and new things to learn for the main character, Zorian Kaczynski. And because of how much I enjoyed reading Mother of Learning Arc 1, I really thought that this would instantly become my favorite book of the month, but that is not the case. Yes, I love this one, but this is not my favorite book of the month. But if you want to know my full thoughts regarding Mother of Learning Arc 1, check out my review on this channel. And moving on to the next one, the next novella that I finished last month is Untethered Sky by Fonda Lee. So this is a standalone novella that doesn't take place in the Greenbone Saga series. So yes, this marked the first time I read anything by Fonda Lee that doesn't take place in the Greenbone Saga world. But as expected, I end up loving this one very much. It is not an Asian-inspired fantasy. It's less than 200 pages long, but I think it was very satisfying, especially for a novella. I don't usually end up loving novella, but I think Fonda Lee, whether she's writing a full novel or novella, I think she excels at both. But of course, if it's up to me, I would certainly prefer Fonda Lee to write novels instead of novellas. But from my analysis and my recommendation, if you are someone who loves reading about animal companionship in your fantasy books, I think there's a good chance you will end up liking Untethered Sky. In my favorite fantasy novellas, I included Untethered Sky as one of my favorite fantasy novellas, and that rarely happens. I think that video, my top 10 favorite novellas video, actually contained all 10 novellas that I would consider as my favorite novellas of all time. There is no new addition to it so far, only that 10 books, that 10 novella. I had a really great time reading Untethered Sky, and also Fonda Lee will be releasing Jade Shards, a collection of short stories in the Greenbone Saga world, within this year as well, and I certainly will read that whenever it's ready to be published. If I'm not mistaken, I think it will be around the month of June or July. And after I finished reading Untethered Sky last month, I read The Way of Edan by my friend and now fellow author Philip Chase. So this is the first book in the Edan trilogy, and just like Mother of Learning Arc 1, I already did a full spoiler-free review for this book. I think this one is really great. It's a blend of classic fantasy and modern fantasy. I think that's really the best way to capture what's so good about The Way of Edan. And of course, there is a bit of a flaw here. I'm not a fan of songs in my fantasy books. So few fantasy books can capture me with the songs written in their books. So few. I think King Killer Chronicle is one of the very few series where I actually love reading the songs in the books. Not even The Lord of the Rings, I actually disliked the songs part, even if they held plenty of meanings after reading through the Silmarillion. But yeah, most of the time, songs in fantasy books, they usually bore me when they're done too much. But other than that, I think the characterizations, the development between the characters in The Way of Edan, and also the prose were all enjoyable to read. I have a feeling that the second and third book will actually be better than The Way of Edan. If you are a reader who loves reading a blend of classic fantasy and modern fantasy in your book, and also you love brotherhood done right between the main characters, well, Dayraven and Imhar, I think both of them has great friendship. I think it is a great debut novel, and there is a potential for this to become my favorite fantasy debut for this year. But this will not be conclusive yet, because I still want to read plenty of fantasy debut being published this year. And moving on to the next one, this is the second novella that I finished. So this is A Prelude to Ashes by Thiago Abdalla. This is the prequel novella before the main novels in the Ashes of Avarin series. So this series, this self-published fantasy series, have been praised highly for the past year. It has been nominated and actually won plenty of nominations for the category of Best Self-Published Fantasy Book or Best Self-Published Fantasy Series. But before I tackled the first book, A Touch of Light, which I will read this year, or this month actually, yeah, I decided to tackle reading the prequel novella first because it was free, and also plenty of reviewers have mentioned that it might be a better idea to actually start your journey from reading A Prelude to Ashes rather than A Touch of Light. So I'm not sure which one is the best starting point here, but I really had a great time reading A Prelude to Ashes. It was because of this novella and also Untethered Sky that I ended up making that my top 10 favorite novellas video. So yeah, I certainly love this one. I think the two main characters were well written. It is not often that I end up liking an action-packed novella, but because of how efficient Thiago Abdalla writes the characterizations, I end up liking this one more than I expected. I look forward to reading A Touch of Light this month. Then the next book that I finished last month, this is The Will of the Many by James Islington. I already did a full spoiler-free review for this one, a long one at that. I think it is my longest review so far. It is up there. In terms of word count, I think it is up there with Rhythm of War by Brandon Sanderson. So as you can probably predict, I absolutely love this one. The Will of the Many is a Roman-inspired fantasy with elements of Red Rising and also magical school or magical academy trope and setting. So I am a fan of magical school trope. I think it is one of my favorite tropes of all time. So with that inclusion in this book, plus a Roman-inspired world building, these two are already a win in my book. And then you add the fact that James Islington wrote this one, well, yeah, I had high expectations towards this, and Islington actually exceeded my incredibly high expectations. I think The Will of the Many is actually the best fantasy book with a magical school trope that I've read since The Name of the Wind. Yes, I love this one that much. If you want to know my full thoughts on this one, I already did almost 20 minutes of review, spoiler-free review for The Will of the Many, and I recommend you to check that one out. But yeah, suffice to say that this one has the big potential to become my favorite book of the year. It is that good, and I know it is quite selfish for me to say that. I cannot wait to read the next book as soon as possible. I mean, this book is not even out yet until 2 months later. Next month, until next month in the month of May. But I really cannot wait to read the next book as soon as possible. The ending was just utterly mind-blowing. I think James Islington is a name that needs to be more recognized, especially on BookTube. Don't get me wrong, outside of BookTube, The Lycaene's Trilogy by James Islington is quite widely loved. Many people on Goodreads or on Facebook and many other social media actually love reading the Lycaene's Trilogy, but on BookTube, it is kinda rare for me to find people who love them. That is me, that is my book review, and hey, I will not stop talking about how much I love the Lycaene's Trilogy and now The Will of the Many as well. I think this is the first book in the Hierarchy series. Is absolutely incredible. And after I finished reading The Will of the Many, I knew I would need to read something incredible again because I was in a book hangover, so I chose to read The Golden Sun by Chris Brown. This is the second book in the Red Rising Saga series by Chris Brown. So Red Rising Saga is still my #1 favorite sci-fi series of all time. And no, I haven't read Sun Eater yet. I will make sure to do that this year, and I will see whether that situation will change or not. I will see whether Red Rising Saga will be dethroned by Sun Eater or not. But yes, Golden Sun is actually my favorite book in the entire Red Rising Saga series so far. I remember reading this for the first time and I was just so captured by every page inside this book. I think this is the best that Pierce Brown has to offer. Let's talk about the pacing first. The pacing inside Golden Sun is one of the fastest I've ever read in any book. Whether it's fantasy or sci-fi, the pacing inside this one is incredibly fast. But even with that in mind, I think Pierce Brown still managed to include effective and efficient characterizations toward Darrow and also his friends, and of course his enemies as well. There are plenty of enemies for Darrow. And because of all these elements combined and also the thrilling and shocking elements of the narrative, it was an incredibly challenging task to actually put down reading the Golden Sun. This felt like reading an emotional roller coaster happening in motion. And my reread of this one, although I did not end up reading this as fast as the first time I read through it, I still had a great time absorbing every page in Golden Sun. The ending of Golden Sun is one of the most shocking, let's just say shocking, to avoid spoilers. It is one of the most shocking endings that I've read in any book, and even on reread, it still remains incredibly impactful. Just absolutely incredible. So well done to Pierce Brown, and I look forward to doing a second read of Morning Star this month. And also one more thing, I know that people like to call Red Rising a YA dystopian novel or something, but I did not feel that way. I know that Red Rising can be considered as a hybrid novel, something that can be enjoyed by both adult and also young adult readers, but I think Golden Sun really moves into the adult space opera category. And let's not even get started with the remaining books in the series, especially Dark Age, which is one of the most gory and brutal book I've ever read, ever. So if you are someone who feels disappointed with probably the first book, Red Rising, I still recommend you to check out Golden Sun. And if after reading Golden Sun you still feel disappointed by the series, I think it is a great time to actually drop reading the series. I mean, at that stage, I think it is safe to say the series is not for you. But for me, this is the best sci-fi series that I've read to this date. And finally, after that, well, this is it. This is the dot that I mentioned at the beginning of this video. The next book that I finished after Golden Sun is the 7th book in the Wheel of Time series by Robert Jordan, A Crown of Swords. Now, I know there are mixed opinions on this book. I mean, some people agreed that this is the beginning of the slog portion of the series. Well, I think it is book number 7 until book number 10. And some have mentioned that the slog started at book 8 until book number 10. So I think it is, well, unanimous that book 8 until book number 10 is the slog portion of the series, but not book 7. Unfortunately, I have to definitely consider book 7 as the beginning of the slog. I mean, this book, it took me 5 weeks. I think more than 5 weeks to actually finish. Never in the history of reading for me, any book took more than 2 weeks to finish. None. I think the last one, and I was already super amazed by how long it took me, and this one was for The Fall of Babel by Josiah Bancroft. The Fall of Babel took 2 weeks for me to finish. This one took 5 weeks. It was just so boring. It was so boring. I mean, at the beginning of this book, I was actually kind of amazed because I was so engrossed with the beginning of A Crown of Swords. At that stage, even after reading the 1 hour long prologue, even after that, I managed to finish reading through the first quarter of the book in about 1 or 2 days. I think it was 2 days. So yeah, that is impressive, right? But after that, we reached the first Ugain's chapters, and everything since then, it was just boredom after boredom. Everything circulated around the same topic, and pretty much the only parts I felt invested in the middle portion of this book, it was from reading Rand's and also Matt's POV chapters, and there are not many enough for that. Also, the Aes Sedai, there are so many Aes Sedai by book number 7, and none of them felt important. It's also very hard to distinguish them from one another. I mean, almost all of them have the same personality. They all hate men. Man is always wrong, and their personality revolves around that logic. Even when they do very awful stuff, I have seen plenty of pollings on Twitter, I think, saying that people would love to be friends with the Aes Sedai. And I'm just, why? why would you want to be friends with these people? They are as awful as the supposed villains of the books, of the series. It's actually quite shocking that Ran hasn't obliterated all of them by now. Seriously, some of the stuff that the Aes Sedai did in this book was so bloody awful, like really bad. But this is not to say there aren't any saving grace for A Crown of Swords. As I mentioned, the first quarter of this book was incredible. I love reading all of Ran's story, even though I still felt very icky about the romance that he has with three ladies. I still don't get why he needs to be that way. But here's the thing with the Wheel of Time. They all have great endings. Every book in the Wheel of Time series up to book 7, all of them have great endings, and that is the same here. But a great beginning and also a great ending is not enough to actually save the entire book, especially when the book is 900 pages long. So yeah, this one was a disappointment. It is incredibly disappointing, and I actually thought I would love to read 4 books in the Wheel of Time series, and that means finishing the slog portion of the series this year. I do not think that will be possible. I think it will be great if I manage to read A Crown of Swords and also the next book, Path to Daggers. I think that's the title of the 8th book within this year. So yeah, wish me luck. The reason I'm doing this is really I want to finish this series, or mainly just to get to Brandon Sanderson's contribution to finishing the Wheel of Time series. But yeah, for now, I would just say that A Crown of Swords was a huge disappointment. I would try my best to finish the series as soon as possible, but I do not think that is possible. Actually, I will have to read this series slowly, even more slowly than I expected. And not gonna lie, I am scared to read the next book because of what I said earlier. People have often mentioned book 8 until book number 10 is supposedly the worst part of the series. So yeah, I guess we'll see. Thankfully, the last book that I finished last month is a great one, and that is The Bone-Shot Emperor by Andrea Stewart. This is the second book in the Drowning Empire trilogy, and the third and final book will be released within this month. And that's why I did a reread of The Bone-Shot Daughter 2 months ago, and I read this one for the first time in the month of March. And just like The Bone-Shot Daughter, I think this is another great book. One of the best strengths of The Bone-Shot Daughter is that the mystery and also the thrilling elements of the book was quite strong, but those elements were missing from this one. There weren't too many mysteries in The Bone-Shot Emperor, but in exchange for that, this book developed a lot of the main characters wonderfully, especially Lin, Jovis, and Nisong. I do not always agree with their actions. I do not agree with Jovis a lot in this book. Jovis tends to shift a lot of the blame toward other people in this book, even though he is also responsible for doing a lot of mistakes. As you can probably tell, I am not a fan of Jovis in The Bone-Shot Emperor, but here's the thing, I think every character development, every characterization here felt intentional. So it's just a matter of me liking them or not. I think Lin developed the most in this book, and I really like the trajectory of the characterizations and also development in her story. And also Nisong, her development was surprising to me. I did not like Nisong in the first book. I think her appearance was too minimal for me to care about her in the first book. But this one, even though her chapters were relatively rarer compared to Lin and Jovis, every chapter with her managed to make me care about her even more. And regarding the story structure in The Bone-Shot Emperor, it kind of reminded me of The Well of Ascension. Almost the entirety of the book revolves around politics, manipulations, and also dialogues. But the last 50 pages, it was all actions. So yeah, The Bone-Shot Emperor has more actions and battle scenes compared to The Bone-Shot Daughter. I like this one. I still cannot decide which one I like more. I will try to make my decision as soon as possible. But for now, let's just say that I like this one as much as The Bone-Shot Daughter, and I cannot wait to read The Bone-Shot World this month and find out how the trilogy will conclude, whether it's satisfying or not. So that's all the novels that I finished last month. As for manga, I managed to finish, or to be more precise, to catch up to reading Sakamoto Days and also reread Vagabond until volume 27. For Sakamoto Days, it is a new read for me. Someone mentioned to me that it is a great action-packed manga series, and yes, it is true. There is an anime adaptation coming for this manga series, I think, someday. But for now, if you are someone who loves John Wick, I think you really should take a read at Sakamoto Days. And of course, this is also for you who love reading manga as well. It's so fun. It is the actions were wonderful. There were plenty of humor inside this as well. So Sakamoto used to be a legendary assassin, one of the best assassins of all time, maybe even the best. But now he's the owner of a convenience store and he's living happily with his family, until of course the past caught up with him. So now he has to deal with his past. But yeah, I think it is great. The actions were amazing. I think it would look awesome animated, and I really like the humor portrayed in this manga series. As for Vagabond, I do not think you need to hear too much about this one from me. I think you know that Vagabond by Takehiko Inoue is one of my top favorite manga series of all time. I've read this manga series more than 5 times. I don't know how many times, a lot. It is a lot. And I decided to do it again this month somehow. And it just never gets old. Love this manga series so much, and I will try to finish my reread of the Vagabond manga series this month. So after all said and done, what's my favorite book of the month? Well, I think you can predict that already. It is The Will of the Many by James Islington. Not only this is my favorite book of the month, I think it is one of the best books that I've read, and it has a great potential to become my favorite book of the year. But the competition this year will be fierce. I still have plenty of supposedly great books to read, so we will see whether this position holds up until the end of the year or not. So yeah, that's pretty much my March wrap up. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, it is an awesome reading month. It is almost a complete win except for, well, book 7 of the Wheel of Time. Do let me know what you think about my March wrap up. Which books I mentioned here sounds the most interesting to you, which one you have read, and also do let me know which one was your favorite book in the month of March, and also how many books you managed to finish last month. So yeah, that's it for me today. As always, thank you so much for watching, and thank you for your support. Bye bye. Lastly, I want to say thank you so much once again to all my patrons who keep on supporting me.